A storm lantern swung in the dark as hooves crunched up the gravel road at midnight. Inside the ranch house, a pregnant stranger held her breath beneath the floorboards while the baby kicked against her ribs. Outside, a gunman sat in the saddle, rain sliding down the barrel of his shotgun as he called her name like a leash. The young rancher stepped barefoot into the mud and leveled his voice. "You come looking for a woman, you found a man instead." In that moment, the storm wasn't the only thing about to break. The wind dragged through the valley like a blade across leather, low, sharp, and mean. Rain didn't fall so much as slam sideways, hissing against the tin roof of the small ranch house and rattling every loose nail like a warning bell. A single lantern, slung from the porch beam, swayed in the gale, its light trembling across the dirt path that led up from the road. Beyond the fence line, just past the reach of the glow, a figure stood unmoving. Before we follow the hoofprints that vanish into the storm and face the questions that linger at the edge of that lantern's light, pause for a heartbeat to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support lets us keep telling the stories of those who stood alone in the mud, shielding the innocent when the law looked away. Every subscription helps us return to the crossroads where choices were made with shaking hands, but unbroken resolve where mercy cost everything, and courage left scars no one else could see. What you do here may seem small, but for the names carved into cedar, for the voices that never got to finish their own story, it matters more than you know. Thank you. Tall, wide-shouldered. A shotgun cradled casual across his arms, like a man greeting a friend with violence held in reserve. The young rancher stepped down from the porch, barefoot, shirt soaked to his ribs, pants clinging with red clay and water. He didn't speak at first. His breath fogged in the cold, and steam lifted off his skin like smoke from a waiting fire. He didn't need to ask who the man was, he knew. The shape of threat has its own familiarity. The man at the gate raised his voice, deep and slurred like old whiskey spilled on gunmetal. "She's my wife." No hesitation in the rancher's eyes. No fear either. Just the kind of stillness that precedes a bolt of lightning or the snap of a trap. Not anymore. They stood there for a long beat, just two silhouettes in the storm, divided by wood slats and blood intent. The gate groaned under the wind, but neither moved. The only thing alive between them was the rain, streaming off the brim of the stranger's hat, dripping from the ends of the rancher's fingers. Every sound in the world had narrowed to the tension of breath, steel, and the pulsing of something ancient in both men's chests. The gun tilted, just a hair, enough to speak a threat. "You're harborin' what's mine," the man growled. "She's not a thing," the rancher answered, voice low. "And she sure as hell ain't yours." Thunder cracked in the distance, not overhead, but crawling closer like the boots of a search party. From inside the house, a dog began to bark, short, sharp, panicked. A baby kicked in a belly upstairs. A floorboard creaked under careful steps. No one inside dared look through the window. The man spat into the mud. "Don't matter what lies she told you, I got claim. She's carrying my blood." The rancher stepped forward, just one step, just enough to make clear that he would not retreat. "Then you left your blood bruised and half-starved in a ditch. You forfeited your claim when you broke her." A pause, a long, low silence, the kind that seems to stretch the storm wider around it. The lantern flickered again, threatened to die, then steadied as if it, too, were holding its breath. "You ain't gonna shoot me," the man said at last. The rancher's reply was calm, measured, certain. "Try me." The stranger's grip on the shotgun didn't change, but something in his stance did. The lean of arrogance turned to wariness. Because mercy in a man's voice, delivered flat and firm, is more dangerous than rage. And some men, when they make peace with what they'll lose, become capable of anything. The gate creaked open an inch. The gunman stepped forward. Inside the house, the woman held her breath and closed her eyes. Outside, the storm leaned in to listen. The wind was different that day, hot and dry, carrying dust instead of rain, like it had forgotten how to be gentle. The sun hung low, already mean with heat, though it wasn't yet noon. Buzzards circled high over the mesa ridge, casting slow, lazy shadows that stretched and curled across the ground like spilled ink. A fence line split the plain in two, wire twisted taut between bleached cedar posts. That's where he saw her. She wasn't walking so much as drifting, a ghost of skin and bones and swollen belly. Her dress, what remained of it, had torn at the hem and across one sleeve. Her feet were bare, caked in blood and grit. One arm cradled her stomach as if afraid it might fall from her. The other swung weakly, searching for balance with each stumbling step. Her hair clung to her face in patches of sweat and dirt, and her mouth moved without sound, whispering something too soft for the wind to carry. He was on his horse, riding fence like he did most mornings. A coil of wire on one hip, rifle slung across his back, boots crusted from yesterday's creek mud. He saw her and slowed, but didn't call out. Just watched for a moment. Watched to see if she'd fall. Watched to see if she'd vanish. She didn't do either. He dismounted in silence, leading the horse with slow, deliberate steps toward her. The mare whinnied softly, sensing something fragile in the air. When he was a few feet away, she stopped walking. Looked up, eyes wide, hollowed out by fear and road miles. "I don't want trouble," she rasped. "You already passed it," he said. "Trouble don't limp this far." She blinked, unsteady. Her knees buckled, but he caught her before she hit the ground. She didn't weigh much. What startled him was how cold her skin felt, like the sun hadn't touched her at all. He didn't ask who she was or where she came from. Didn't ask who the father was. Didn't ask what she was running from. Some men need stories. He'd seen enough to know the bruises did the telling. He lifted her onto the horse and walked beside it the whole way home. By nightfall, she lay wrapped in 2 blankets on the small bed in the spare room once his brother's, back before the war. He sat across from her by the fire, quietly placing a bowl of beans and cornbread on the table between them. She didn't reach for it at first, too dazed or too proud, but hunger always wins. Her hand trembled when she picked up the spoon. He didn't look at her belly. Just watched the fire, stoking it with slow pushes of the iron poker. "You don't need to tell me a thing," he said. That's when she finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "I don't remember what safe feels like." He nodded. "Then we'll start with quiet." And that night, the wind softened. The house stayed warm, and for the first time in what seemed like 1,000 miles, she slept without dreaming of footsteps behind her. They stood in front of the justice of the peace just after dawn, the rising sun slanting through the cracked windows of the small courthouse like judgment. No fanfare, no white dress, no family. She wore the same dress he'd washed and set out the night before, patched at the hem, dried stiff from the stove's heat. He hadn't shaved. The preacher looked confused, then annoyed, then resigned. "Name?" he asked. "Samuel Reed," the rancher said, his voice firm but low. The girl hesitated. Then, softer than the sound of wind through dry grass, "Clara." "Full name?" the preacher pressed. She didn't answer. Samuel looked at her but didn't speak. He just nodded once, slow and sure. Then turned back to the man holding the worn Bible. "Doesn't matter, she's Clara Reed now." The ceremony took less than 3 minutes. No kiss, no vows beyond the bare legal form. She barely looked up. Her hands trembled when she signed the ledger. But she did sign. Outside, the town was already stirring. Dry goods shop opening. Blacksmith hammering somewhere in the distance. Dust in the air, same as always. But by the time they reached the post office steps, the looks had already begun. A woman with 2 children froze mid-step and steered them sharply across the street. A ranch hand muttered something crude and spat in the dirt. The store clerk leaned against the frame of his door and squinted, eyes full of judgment. They didn't say anything outright, not yet, but they didn't have to. The questions hung like smoke, visible, lingering, choking. Who marries a woman he met yesterday? Why her? Why now? Why risk everything for someone already broken? Samuel felt their stares press against his shoulders like the weight of an old yoke, but he didn't flinch. He only pulled his hat lower and kept walking, one hand hovering gently behind Clara's back, not touching her, but close enough that she knew he'd catch her if she fell. Back at the ranch, he unsaddled the mare in silence while she stood by the porch steps, arms wrapped around herself as though afraid she might come apart. The storm from the night before had left everything wet and glistening, the earth soft underfoot. She looked around like she didn't trust the stillness, as if it were just a trick before something cruel. He didn't offer promises, didn't ask for gratitude. He just turned to her and said, "No one comes through that gate unless I say so." She opened her mouth, but whatever words she had dissolved before they formed. She simply nodded and stepped inside. Later, as he scrubbed mud from his boots by the fire, he stared at the gold ring he'd slid onto her finger, one his mother had left behind in a box of old photographs. Not meant for this, not meant for now, but it fit. In town, they'd call him desperate. A fool. A man so hollowed by solitude he'd tethered himself to mystery and ruin. But he didn't care. He wasn't saving her because she was perfect. He was saving her because someone had to. And if that meant inviting danger into his own home, then so be it. The wind shifted 2 days after the wedding, and with it came talk. Not the kind that you hear straight to your face, but the sideways kind, half-formed words behind swinging saloon doors, glances exchanged at the feed store, sentences that trailed off when Samuel stepped too close. It moved like smoke, slow and creeping, and it got into everything. Clara didn't go into town anymore. Not after the incident outside the milliner's, when a woman pulled her daughter behind her like a curtain and said, "Just loud enough, that's her, the one he married." The girl stared at Clara's belly. Clara didn't flinch, didn't run. She simply turned around and walked out, her shoulders square and trembling. Samuel heard it all, second-hand, some from Tom, the blacksmith, who still owed him for 2 fence repairs, some from Mrs. Lancer, who brought eggs every week and never stopped talking. But he didn't respond. He didn't correct the stories, let them build like thunderheads if they wanted. He knew what he'd seen. A woman half dead with fear, walking through hell with bare feet and eyes too tired to lie. He didn't need to explain that to anyone. But that didn't mean the pressure didn't build. One afternoon, as he repaired a latch on the front gate, the preacher rode up slow and silent, his horse kicking dust behind it in lazy puffs. Samuel didn't look up until the shadow fell over him. "She's hiding something," the preacher said. "We all are," Samuel replied, tightening the bolt. "She's not from here. You don't know her people. You don't know where she came from or what brought her crawling through our land." "I know what I saw," Samuel said without raising his voice. The preacher leaned forward in the saddle, eyes narrowing. "You think you saved her, but what if you just adopted her sins?" Samuel straightened, wiped his hands on his jeans, and looked the man in the eye. "Then I'll carry them, same as I carry my own." That night, Clara sat at the kitchen table, her hands curled around a cup of warm milk she hadn't touched. The fire snapped behind them, casting long shadows on the wall. Samuel stood at the window, staring out into the black. "He'll come for me," she said suddenly. He turned, and she didn't flinch this time. "He always said he would. Even if it took years, even if I had to crawl inside someone else's life. He said I was his. Always his." Samuel crossed the room without a word and opened the cabinet. He took out the rifle, long, oiled, deadly in quiet ways. He checked the chamber, loaded the rounds with steady fingers, and set it beside the door. Then, he moved to the windows. One by one, he nailed slats across the frames. Boards that had been stacked in the barn for repairs he hadn't gotten around to. He worked in silence, but the message was loud. If the storm was coming, then let it come. He wouldn't let her run again. Not this time. Not from here. He didn't need her past to be clean. He only needed her safe. Midnight came with no moon, just a thick blanket of black sky and a wind that had lost its direction. The lanterns were out. The house breathed quietly. Only the ticking of the old clock in the parlor marked the hour, each click like the slow turning of a lock. Then came the sound, faint at first, like a memory in the dark. Hooves, not galloping, but deliberate, slow, crunching over gravel with purpose. Each step a promise. The dog, silent all evening, let out a low growl from under the porch. Then it whimpered and went quiet. Clara sat upright in the narrow bed, heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't need to look out the window, she knew. Her hands moved on their own, one pressed to her belly, the other grabbing the loose floorboard beside the bed. She'd seen Samuel pry it open once to check for old wiring. She hadn't said anything, but she'd remembered. She slipped through the opening with the panic of someone who'd done it before. Her body barely fit. Dust rose in her throat. The wood above her creaked as she pulled the board shut, sealing herself in darkness. Outside, the hooves stopped. A voice, raw and wet with hate, called out. Clara. No knock. Just her name, stretched and broken, like something dragged across nails. Come out now, girl, I won't ask twice. Samuel was already at the door. He hadn't been asleep. He'd been sitting by the cold stove, boots still on, rifle across his lap like a prayer no one dared whisper. He stood now, silent, shoulders squared, breath even. He unlatched the bolt and opened the door slow. Rain hadn't started yet, but the clouds had gathered heavy above, pressing down on the world like judgment. A figure sat atop a pale horse at the edge of the clearing, just past the gate. A long coat draped over his shoulders, and though the light barely reached him, the glint of steel in his hand was unmistakable. The man didn't move forward, didn't need to. You've got something of mine, he said. Samuel stepped out onto the porch. The boards creaked under his weight, but his voice was solid as the land beneath them. She's not a thing, and you don't own her. She's my wife, the man hissed. Not anymore. The pause that followed was thick with more than silence. It was history, bitter, rotting, and full of nails. The man in the yard laughed, a sound like glass cracking in frost. You think you can keep her from me? You think a name on some paper makes her yours? Samuel raised the rifle, but didn't point it yet. He wasn't bluffing. He just hadn't decided which part of the man to shoot first. You came looking for a woman, he said. But you found a man instead. A gust of wind tore through the trees behind the house, and somewhere, far off, thunder rolled. Inside, beneath the floorboards, Clara held her breath. Outside, at the edge of violence, Samuel waited. The wind had died completely, as if the earth itself had paused to listen. The stillness was eerie, no rustle of grass, no creak of the gate, not even the coyote wail that usually marked the hour. Just the soft buzz of the lantern flame behind Samuel and the thunder of blood in his own ears. Inside the house, beneath the floorboards, Clara pressed her palm against her belly. The baby stirred again, sharp and sudden, like it too could sense the storm standing just beyond the porch. She closed her eyes, gritted her teeth. Every instinct screamed to flee, but there was nowhere left to run. Not anymore, not again. Outside, the man sat tall in the saddle, cocked slightly forward, as if itching for permission to strike. He hadn't blinked since he arrived. His voice carried like venom on a blade. She ran, he said. That makes her mine. Samuel didn't flinch. His jaw worked once, then went still. He stepped down off the porch, boots crunching against the gravel path soaked by last night's storm. The rifle stayed low in his hand, but his eyes never left the man. You don't own what you broke, Samuel said. You don't get to lose a woman and claim her because she didn't crawl back. She's carryin' my blood." Samuel raised his chin slightly. "Then why is she shaking in my house and not yours?" The man's grip on the reins tightened, the leather creaking under his knuckles. "You think she told you the truth? You think that baby's even mine? You think she didn't lie her way into your bed like she lied her way out of mine?" Samuel stepped closer now. He could see the sweat on the man's brow, the twitch at the corner of his mouth, fury masquerading as righteousness. "Does it eat at you?" Samuel asked quietly. "That someone looked at her and saw more than a possession?" "She's nothing," the man snapped. "Then why ride through the night to get her back?" That stopped him for half a beat. Inside the house, Clara shifted, hands trembling over her belly. Her breathing came short and shallow. The baby moved again, this time more insistently, as if it, too, was waiting for the outcome. Outside, the silence deepened, drawn tight as a wire. "She don't belong to you," Samuel said. "Not anymore. You forfeited the right to claim a woman when you started using her ribs for a ledger. You don't know what she's done. And you think that justifies what you did." A flicker of something passed through the man's eyes, doubt, maybe, or memory. But it vanished fast, swept away by old habits and older wounds. He lifted the shotgun slightly, not enough to aim, just enough to threaten. Samuel raised his voice then, not with anger, but with clarity. "She's safe now, and you don't get to change that." The wind picked up again, slow and cold, brushing against their faces like a warning. "So what do you think? Does blood make you a father, or something else entirely?" The horse pawed at the earth. The air grew heavier. Neither man moved. But something was about to break. The floorboards groaned softly as Clara pressed upward with both hands, pushing aside the loose plank. The cold air hit her like a slap, but she didn't hesitate. Her breath came ragged. Her knees trembled beneath her shift, but her hand gripped tight around a small, rusted chain. She'd kept hidden all this time, curled beneath her pillow, clutched in sleep like a talisman. Now, it burned against her palm. Outside, the men hadn't moved. Samuel still stood firm, jaw locked, rifle low but steady. The stranger's horse shifted under him, sensing the tension crawling up its legs from the earth. The man hadn't spoken again, but the anger in his posture had coiled tighter, a snake near the strike. Clara stepped into the doorway, pale and barefoot. Her shadow stretched long behind her in the lantern's light. Her eyes didn't blink. She didn't look at Samuel. She didn't look at the shotgun. She looked only at the man on the horse. "You're not my husband," she said. His head turned slowly. Surprise? Disbelief? It didn't matter. "I told you he died," she went on, voice low and steady. "But I never told you how." She stepped forward, fingers trembling around the chain. With a single motion, she tossed it. The dog tag hit the mud with a soft thud, the metal catching the light before it settled. The man's gaze flicked down. "Read the name," froze. Clara's voice cracked then, not from weakness but from the weight of truth long buried. 2 months ago, in Missouri, a house fire. He ran back inside for the neighbor's little girl, got them both out. Roof collapsed before he could get clear. Silence swallowed the clearing whole. Samuel's eyes drifted to the tag, then back to Clara. He said nothing. She stepped forward again, her bare feet sinking into the mud. She pointed at the man like she was naming a sickness. "You weren't the husband. You were the one my father sold me to after. Said it would pay down his gambling debt. You called it a contract. I called it a cage." The man spat. "You signed it. I was 16. And scared. And alone." His lip curled. "You were mine." Clara shook her head. "You never even asked my name." She took another step forward, wind tugging at the hem of her nightdress. The fire in her eyes burned hotter than any flame that took her husband. He didn't want a wife, he wanted debt payment, You want ownership. But her voice caught, softened, he wanted family. The dog tag sat there between them, like a bullet that hadn't gone off. Samuel didn't need more explanation. He didn't ask for it. All he did was lift the rifle just a little higher, barrel glinting in the lantern light. The man's hands flexed once on the reins, then stilled. "You should go," Samuel said. Clara didn't move. Neither did the dog tag, half sunk in the mud, more powerful than any document or weapon. And for the first time, the man looked uncertain. Like maybe, just maybe, he'd lost something he never truly had. The tension was a living thing now, thick in the air, pulsing between them like a coiled spring, straining to snap. The wind stirred only enough to rattle the lantern's flame and lift the edge of Clara's nightdress. She stood still beside the door, her chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. Samuel was a step ahead of her, rifle aimed square at the man's chest, boots planted like stakes in the ground. No more room for talk. No more room for mercy. The man on the horse adjusted his grip on the shotgun, then loosened it again, just slightly, fingers twitching against the polished wood. His eyes darted from Samuel to Clara and back, something calculating flickering beneath the fury. But whatever he saw didn't favor him. Samuel's voice cut through the dark like flint against stone. "Step forward. Or step off." The horse pawed at the earth, uneasy now, as if it too sensed the balance tipping. The man didn't answer at first. His jaw clenched. A muscle twitched in his cheek. He'd come here sure of something, his right, his claim, his power. But the silence had unraveled it. Clara's voice, her truth. The dog tag half buried in the mud, they'd taken the breath out of his threat. And Samuel? He didn't blink. He didn't waver. He'd already made peace with what he was willing to do. The shotgun dipped, just barely. It wasn't surrender, but it was something close to doubt. Clara spoke again, voice dry and clear as bone. "You'll always be the man I ran from. Never the one I came back to." That landed harder than any bullet. The man looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time and hated what he saw. "You think this is the end?" he asked, quieter now. Samuel didn't lower the rifle. "It is if you turn that horse around." The man shifted in the saddle, grunted, and looked down at the mud beneath his boots. He spat once, hard, into the earth. Then he turned. No words, no warning. Just a hard yank on the reins and the sharp clatter of hooves as the horse pivoted and bolted down the path. The darkness swallowed him quickly, leaving only the echo of retreat in the trees and a churned-up trail of gravel in his wake. But just before the last of him vanished into the brush, his voice called out, low and guttural, "This ain't over." Samuel stood there long after the sound was gone, the rifle still in his hands. The air colder now. Clara didn't speak. She walked forward slowly, stood beside him, arms around her belly like a shield and an anchor both. They didn't touch, but the closeness said everything. The night didn't feel safe. Not yet. But it was still theirs. For now. The sun rose slow and golden over the ridge, painting the fields in soft light that clung to the grass like dew. Morning settled gently over the ranch, the kind of morning earned only through long nights and longer silence. A soft breeze carried the scent of hay and mesquite, stirring the tall stalks as they bowed and whispered to one another. Somewhere, a sparrow sang its small, defiant hymn. At the front gate, a new cedar post stood tall, freshly cut, smooth at the top, and carved deep with 3 names, Samuel, Clara, and Hope. The last name was crooked, as if carved by a hand not yet steady, or maybe one still learning how to shape something sacred. The letters glinted with oil rubbed into the grain, dark and proud against the pale wood. It was the kind of sign that didn't just mark a place, it claimed it. Beyond the gate, in a patch of sun-drenched grass, a child wobbled through the stalks on unsteady feet, each step an adventure. Her laugh rang out like a small bell, startling a nearby grasshopper into flight. She fell once, sat hard, then looked around in confusion before bursting into delighted giggles. Clara was already at her side before the girl could cry, scooping her up in strong arms. She held the child close, kissed her forehead, then let her toddle off again with bare feet and an unshakable will. Clara stood straighter now. The shadows in her face had faded, softened by time and light and the slow rebuilding of a woman who had once only known how to run. Her hair was longer, pulled back in a loose braid, and her eyes, though still watchful, no longer flinched at every sound. She looked down the road often, but not with dread. She watched it with patience. Sometimes she wondered what had happened to him, the man who once called her his. Whether he died in some nameless skirmish or vanished into the drunk corners of some distant saloon. Maybe he was still out there, nursing his pride like a wound, waiting for a reason to come back. But even that thought didn't shake her anymore, because she knew what waited here now. Samuel stood at the edge of the barn, hands on his hips, watching both of them with a kind of reverence he didn't speak out loud. He was leaner than he'd been, sun-worn and older in the eyes, but the weight he'd carried, grief, guilt, solitude, had lessened. Maybe not gone, but shared now. He still kept the rifle by the door, same as always, but he hadn't needed it in a long while. They'd built something here. Something rooted. Something that wouldn't blow away just because a storm came down the road again. The child fell once more, this time near the carved post. She reached out and touched the lowest name, patting it like it was a friend. Clara smiled. Then she looked to the road again, just once. And if he ever does come back, should the rancher spare him? Or finish it for good?